Hello, everyone. This is a data-driven chat, and today I'm really happy and thrilled to have Maria Axente with us. So she's responsible AI and AI4Good lead at PwC. She has done absolutely amazing work in this area, and I'm very excited to have her with us. Hi, Maria.
Good morning, Ganna, and thank you very much for having me here.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for finding the time. So just to kind of jump straight into the topic, on your various profiles that you have on the web, it says that your work focuses on responsible AI. And there are many definitions of responsible AI. So I just wanted to ask you what meaning do you put into these two words, responsible AI? What is responsible AI?
Thank you so much for the question. It's a question that I get asked a lot because responsible AI is a term that is currently used by a lot of organizations, both for profit and non-for-profit, but also national and supranational organizations like Global Partnership on AI. And it seems to be a little bit of confusion in what exactly the term is. And while when we started using a responsible AI term in 2017, when we launched the first version of our toolkit, we didn't pay so much attention of the framing. It has become clear that we need to be focusing on, but what is responsible AI? So as far as I've seen, there are two definitions of responsible AI, or two ways of looking at it. One is focusing on outcomes, so describing a desired outcome delivered by AI, and that is an outcome that's fair, is transparent, is trustworthy, it's robust, is secure, it does what it says on the tin, is beneficial. So that's one broad categories of responsible AI definition out there. And in this category, you'd see Global Partnership on AI, other tech companies that will use this definition, which leaves, in a sense, the process of getting to that outcome on a side. The second category of definitions of responsible AI, the ones we use, focus more on how do we get to that outcome that is fair, transparent, and so on and so forth, because we understand that all those attributes mean different things from different people. So therefore, in order to achieve that, you have to focusing on rethinking how you build AI in a certain way, and making sure that you have some prerequisites in place, some capabilities in place, so that when you go to the process at the end, you will have an outcome that could be described by those attributes. So in PwC taxonomy, our responsible AI means a way of building AI that will allow the owners, the designers, and the user to remain in control. And in order to do this, you have to consider three main group of action. First, and the most important one, identifying the right ethical principles and embed those throughout the life cycle of AI development. That starts not only when we define the problems and the business understanding, but what we say, it starts with a corporate strategy where you start defining corporate goals and how technology like AI aligns with those goals. The second is obviously understanding what are the right structures that needs to be put in place, and with roles and responsibility to be able to operate AI in a safe and trusted and robust manner. So governance again throughout the life cycle. And the third layer is about understanding and mitigating risk proactively, again in the same manner through throughout the life cycle, and making sure that governing AI and embedding values is not left like an afterthought or an activity that you do as a checklist, but is proactively considered throughout the life cycle.
Mm-hmm. So it's basically building responsible systems by design, right? So kind of thinking about it from the outset and understanding the risk from the outset.
Yes.
Yeah. We will come back.
Responsible by design.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we will come back to this point, but before we go into kind of the details about responsible AI, I also want to ask you about how did you develop an interest in responsible AI? Because a lot of our listeners and a lot of people who watch us on YouTube, they essentially are aspiring data scientists, so people who would like to get a career in responsible or ethical AI. They're also interested in AI governance. So if you could tell us a little bit more about your personal interest, how did you become excited about this particular topic?
It came with the job, to be honest, right? So when we started the AI journey in PwC UK, and we built our center of excellence almost 4 years ago, actually no, 4 years ago, and it's the same time I joined the center of excellence. We started thinking about AI in those terms. How do we remain in control? How are we do we make sure that we understand the risk associated with AI, and therefore being able to identify the right values. So my journey with responsible AI, in fact, started when we, as a organization, started the journey of responsible AI, and because PwC is a firm that does audit, financial audit, but also risk assurance around technology. We had this knowledge in the house. We have been helping our clients think about ways to understand risk associated with technologies and mitigate this. Therefore, we translated this experience and knowledge into the world of AI and created the first the tool which we launched in 2017, which looked narrowly at the notion of governance of AI, right? That's how do we understand what are the different roles, responsibility, how do you bring together different departments within the same organization to be able to work seamlessly together to deliver a safe and trusted AI. And while this was the journey through the lenses of the work, my interest in the ethical side of AI grew significantly as I started interacting with the AI community here in UK and working with research in academic institutions, but also with the public policy, and being able to further iterate this story of ethical and responsible AI at UK level. And therefore, how do we bring those societal consideration around developing AI into the realm of private organizations, and being able to match those two corpus of knowledge, the ones that derive from societal and individual needs of building trustworthy AI, and the ones that are linked with organizational purposes of doing the same for different stakeholders and different objectives, and being able to synchronize those objectives for two stakeholders groups.
Well, yes, sounds really exciting. And on in this series, we talk a lot about the disconnect between people who are working in different operations with regard to AI. So I'm sure that this is a fascinating area and requires a lot of thinking in terms of how to organize these systems in the most efficient way. So kind of I want to continue a little bit, so the kind of the line of questions about your career and your journey. So if I ask you to pick one most important thing that you have done so far in your entire career, something that you're particularly proud of, what would that be?
Oh, that's an unexpected question. I don't get to be asked that question that much. I think that there are two layers to these questions. First, what I'm the most proud of when it comes of achievements, and I would say the one thing that gets me out of the bed and motivates me to do this work is the fact that I how should I put it? I inspire people. Mm-hmm. And I feel this. I inspire my colleagues to think outside the box, to consider things they haven't considered before. And I am able to do this because I get to get inspired by other people as well. So in a way, that's probably my way of giving back, because I'm constantly amazed and in awe with so many great people in this field of AI and AI ethics, and I've learned a lot from them. And that's the way I want to give back, by doing the same with other people and trying to inspire them to think differently, empower them to think differently, and beyond their narrow, or sometimes our narrow views and narrow jobs to a certain extent, so that we can bring it all together. But on a personal level, the one thing that I'm most proud of is that I think I finally found my true love. I've reinvented my career so many times in the past. So I'm from Romania. I came to UK 11 years ago to pursue an MBA. And by the time I came to the UK, I had a successful career in Romania by running businesses, transforming businesses. I've done a lot of things before I moved here that had a little bit to do with technology, but more to do with businesses as a whole. And I came here, reinvented again my career, joined technology consulting, and I've done quite a bit of work around software development, digital transformation. And when I finally ended up in the AI team and started working around responsible AI, I was able to bring all that experience I had and I have into making the narrative of responsible AI, and with that, how we advise our clients of different sizes and different shapes, so that they consider all the implications. So I would say, on one hand, I'm proud that I was able to continually search for the best thing I could do in my career, but ultimately the thing that I'm most proud about is to be able to share that with the people around me, both my colleagues and everyone else I work with, for us like UNICEF or World Economic Forum or UN, and being able to transfer this knowledge and give it back to others, as it has been so generously given to me during my career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we again in this series we talked a lot about role models, and especially a lot of women would come in, on the series and say, "Well, it's very important to have role models." And I mean, you've been named as one of role models by many people. So I'm particularly excited to have you with us today. So definitely thank you for providing this example. And I think it's important for many people, not only women but men as well. And I think this is also important, not just to produce impact kind of for one group, but across the board. So I want to come to your point about trustworthy AI. And, when we look at the current landscape, we see that basically responsible AI and the trustworthy AI are not perceived by all people the questions around these two things are not perceived by all people in the same way. And equally, people do not trust AI. But we always talk about the necessity to make AI trustworthy. And I just want to be a little bit of a devil's advocate and say, do we really need to make AI trustworthy? So why is that so important to have trustworthy AI?
I love this question, because I think it brings together so many different strands of work we're doing, and also being able to force us to think about the impact, long-term impact. So when we talk about trust and thinking about trust around in computer science, I think it's a little bit of novelty. We didn't have to worry as much about individuals or societal trust in a technology in the past, because of various reasons, but mostly the nature of the system and the fact they were not as critical to a lot of the decisions or action that have happened in society. There was still a human in control of those systems. But with the world of AI, that's about to change, right? We will start delegating a lot of critical, in some cases, tasks, not only in decision making, but also in related to actions like who gets to go to a certain school or not, who gets to get social benefits, who gets to be put to trial or not. And when we step into this type of decisions, I think we need to be 100% sure what we're doing, and not only in terms of building a technology that will deliver a fair outcome, but understand the process where this tool is being incorporated. A lot of the times we have seen the big ethical failures, including the famous A-level results fiasco last year here in the UK. The problem was not so much the technologies. The problem lay with how people use this technology, how many perspectives they have been considering building this technology, and how the results were being communicated to the wider public. And that shows, again, that we need to start rethinking how we approach technology. And that's the hardest thing on us, the ones working in this field, to be doing, to change or shift from that mentality that currently still powers so much the computer science world, from education into research into the build and use of technology, of can I build it? That's the mantra of the Silicon Valley, with move fast and break things, to something that is around the line, should I build it? Even if I can, should I build it after all? Because the risk might overtake the benefits. Therefore, should I do it? Should I not consider all the different implications, including different stakeholders they're not considered before? So having this in mind, and the fact that we as people working in AI have an increased responsibility, an extended responsibility, the way we build AI, it's probably a little bit easy to start thinking about trustworthy AI and why we need it. We are facing a highly disruptive technology that promise a lot of benefits, and because of those benefits, a lot of executive and C-suite, the ones that we are talking to and our clients in PwC, have got really excited and started allocating resources to be able to develop and scale and use AI. But in the same time, we have seen with so many use cases of failed AI, that the risk that AI brings as well. So it's understandable for some people not to trust it, but in the same time, it's a huge opportunity for us to really rethink how we want to use AI in the current context. How do we need to transform the way we organize ourselves so that we are able to harness the benefits, but also mitigate the risk? And also, how do we create not an AI industry, because I don't personally believe there will be a such thing called AI industry, but how do we operate society in a way that protect the most vulnerable, but also being able to have all those risk consideration embedded throughout, right? Because that's the biggest thing. That's the message of the should I. Do I understand the implication? Do I understand the risk? Do I know what would it mean if I develop a social media platform that will bring all the teams of the world together, and I ended up shaping their views and the ideas? And how much of a responsibility should I have about doing this to the future of humanity? Those are questions that need to be asked on one hand, but in the same thing, we have to be able to get inspiration from other industry like the aviation, and see how do they approach providing safety in the space, and being able to translate all those best practices from other industry and sectors and areas of life into the use of AI, so that we make sure that, as I said so many times, and I'll repeat it over and over again, we don't only focus on the benefits, we focus on the risk, and we consider all the different groups of people that can be impacted, not just the immediate and direct users. When Alexa were created, that was designed for adults to be able to have a better way of interacting with with the world knowledge, but it ended up being used by children. How much do we know about the interaction between children and virtual assistants? And do we understand the dangers of allowing an algorithm to shape our kids' personalities, perception, values? All those things needs to be considered in design from the start. And while we do this, being able to educate to a certain extent everyone that is involved, so that we will be dealt with unintended consequences, we will be able to address it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I kind of, again, want to go a little bit deeper on this. And you touched on many topics here. But so when we think about trust, right, what is the fundamental, or is there a fundamental difference between trust in another human being and trust in an algorithm, or trust in an artificial intelligence? So what are these differences? You mentioned that, there is not only a problem with the algorithm in itself. The algorithm itself might be quite nicely written, right, and could be, let's just assume, completely ethical. But if people do not perceive it to be fair, to be ethical, then it's not going to work, right? So yeah, so in your view, what, or maybe through your line of work, what is this fundamental difference between trust in a human being and trust in an algorithm?
Yeah, let's put it in a different way. When we travel, when we fly, right? Who do we trust? Do we trust the pilot? Do we trust the co-pilot, the stewardess? Do we trust the engineers? Do we actually require to see the specification of the engine? Do we require to see the documentation of how the engine was built? Do we need to know that there's a staff on the ground that guide the takeoff and the landing? I don't think that we do. We don't do this because the aviation industry have worked really hard to provide the right guardrails and safety measures in every single activity and every single part of this ecosystem. So I think that's the biggest difference, is that trust has two components. Once we trust each other or we don't trust each other is a human trait, I would say, or a way of us forming social bonds. But when it comes to artifacts, that's when we had an example in aviation industry, but there are so many others when we don't trust the artifact per se, but we trust an ecosystem that where this artifact is being used has baked in all the safety measures that are required, and therefore I trust the system that it's not only safe for me to use, it's also aligned with the regulations and the laws in place, and is able to address, if any issues arises, they have what it takes to be able to address any issue that arises. So I think that's probably the most easiest way to explain the big difference. And the way for us to think about how do we trust AI is not about trusting either the owners or the developers or the artifact itself. I can't even say I trust my fridge that will continue to keep my food frozen for the rest of the week, or I trust my washing machine. But I trust the whatever company has built my fridge, that they have done everything they needed to do, and that's compliant with some rules and the regulation, but some safety procedures. And they provided me with all the necessary knowledge and information to all the different channels, so that I actually I can rely on using the fridge with no problem, and I know what I need to be doing in case that there are some faults with the usage.
And
so to me, that's the way it's to think about AI is with the experience we have in our day-to-day life.
Yeah, so I was gonna kind of ask you about, is this trust context specific or area specific. So are there any specific areas where you would definitely trust AI and other areas where you would completely not trust it? So we've done quite a few, well, I'm a behavioral data scientist, so we do a lot of the behavioral experiments with people and asking them about, in what under what conditions they would trust AI. So normally, for example, when we ask people about whether they would allow a robot take care of them when they're old, the majority of people say yes. But when we ask, would you trust a robot to take care, say, of your parents, the majority of people say no. So there seems to be that there is quite a lot of, perceptual differentiation of context in which, we as humans are prepared to trust algorithms, and there are other contexts where we are completely not prepared to trust algorithms. So for you personally, is it the same? Or like you said, if you have this perception that, okay, this particular company did everything in their power to consider the risks, then, I'm happy to kind of put my trust into this product or into this process.
Personally, I think I would be a little bit more skeptic.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's one thing where I don't want to use AI, and actually I don't use technology, is I try to keep it, the use of technology to a minimum, is around maintaining human relationship. Anything to do with human relation, I would want to be done as much as possible face to face. Obviously, when we talk about the current condition and the fact that I'm away by from my family by default, I need to rely heavily on technology to keeping in touch and keeping close to them. But whatever that's possible, and there's a proximity between us, the humans, I prefer to have this human to human relationship. And especially after this year and this experience with the pandemic, I would say even more how important it is for us to consider thoroughly, how do we want technology to work for us? When do you want to use it? Do we actually want to develop robots that look after humans? Do we actually really understand that the mental health crisis it has to do probably everything with the fact that we are not in contact with each other, and the fact that lack of human contact and meaningful human contact is the root cause of so many evils in society. Do we actually want to perpetuate that by replacing the humans with machines? So I would say no, I wouldn't trust AI, for example, to look after my parents, but also myself. I would still want to, when I'm very old, hopefully I will get to that age, to be looked after by another human, and keep the machine doing what they do the best, right? Retrieving information, classifying information, find the patterns, predictions, automating. But when it comes of the human interaction, creativity, compassion, care, let us continue with what we have, because in this process, if we aim to use machine, no matter how promising and how encouraging those machines are, they will not be able to fully, I wouldn't say fully replace, but they wouldn't be able to play the role of a human as even the worst of humans. So I think we need to be very careful of how do we use machine, especially when we talk about replacing a human to play a role with another human. I'm not sure that I like my answer, so maybe we would want to, I would want to think about it even a little bit more. But I think this is a really interesting question that requires probably much more thinking from me than this convoluted answer that I gave you.
No. I mean, I think it's all that it makes perfect sense. So, yeah, I'm sorry for putting you on the spot with this. In terms of obviously, you look at these problems of ethical and responsible AI a lot, and risks associated with artificial intelligence a lot. So, in your view, what are the most important risks that are associated with artificial intelligence? I know that there are many, but maybe if you could pick, I don't know, top 3 or 3 that immediately come to mind when we think about artificial intelligence and, for example, personal data, or, I will let you pick the aspect that you want to talk about.
The ethical risk associated with AI obviously have started get more attention, which is really good, right? We start talking about the fact that AI could exacerbate biases, societal biases, organizational biases, that are prone to instability, and because of opacity, we can end up having where decisions that cannot be explained and that cannot be reliable have forced, we hamper the trust that citizens or user put into the respective institutions. But when we think about the actual more present risk of AI, ethical risk in relation to AI, I will put those categories that derive from the key ethical principle on a side and think about what I see a day to day, especially in relation with the personal data. First and foremost is the fact that we rely a lot on data scientists and statisticians to solve problems that are not problems for them to solve, right? So, and I'll explain in a second. We know the scientists and computer science engineers have got to the conclusion that AI is not just a general purpose technology. It's not just about the maths and the code and the data you put in. It's about also the social, economical, political, and environmental context where those solutions are being designed, used, and scaled. So therefore, we need to be understanding who are the people who design it, what sort of objective this problem is attached to, and what will be the implication. So to me, this is the biggest risk of all, the fact that the vast majority of the data science community still assumes that by crunching numbers and coming up with a perfect model, it's enough to solve an AI related issues. And most of the ethical failings that you've seen have happened because of that. We over reliance on data science to solve non-data science related questions. The second one, and I'll be probably a little bit provocative here, but my provocation comes as a result of reading a phenomenal book, which I would recommend to all of you. It's Privacy's Powers, is the book of Carissa Valise. Is a phenomenal book that brings a new vision about privacy around personal data. And what Carissa says here, and that's become more obvious to me, is the lack of awareness to a certain extent that triggers a certain lack of updated responsibility among data scientists. The fact that data scientists are playing with personal data as like they are little gods, and no disrespect to the data science community out there, but when you actually crunch numbers that represent people's life, we would need to have a different approach to that process, probably very similar to the way doctors handle patients' data and the duty of care they have when they manage anything to do with patients. It should be applied in this case, because someone crunching those numbers in relation to people's life will ultimately affect people's life. So it's very critical to have this new updated responsibility. And the third one, I would say, probably equally big challenge is the fact that most of the business models out there, of the big tech companies are based on harnessing personal data, and the fact that big money are being made out of harnessing and using personal data. And as long as we don't find a way to regulate that and draw some hard boundaries, we won't be able to do anything significantly around the field of responsible AI, especially when we talk about the companies where they are the AI companies by definition. So there's a lot of work ahead of us in terms of negotiating our way through how do we perceive privacy, and what do we want to do with personal data, what is personal data to all of us in relation to our lives, and what's the role of the governments beyond the mere protection of this data, going deeper into, but what does it mean for our lives to have all this data out there, for private companies to know more about ourselves that we ourselves know, or even our governments, and what sort of responsibility of care all those companies have around using our personal data.
And I guess a closely related question to this would be, in the current COVID-affected world, right? There are a lot of concerns that people have with regard to privacy, in particular, because we have all sorts of increased surveillance mechanisms that perpetrated our lives. So, in your view, did all this kind of increased use of technology, did it affect our perception of responsible AI systems? And if it did affect, in what way?
Here is where I want to be a little bit optimistic and say, I think it has affected in a positive way, at least the perception of the wider society on how, on one hand, that building tech, even a contract tracing app, is rocket science, right? What we see on our phones and what we see on a desktop is the mere top of the iceberg. The infrastructure and the architecture required to deliver such technology, it's terribly complicated, and different choices of architecture can have a significant impact on the final outcome. So I'm tend to say that because of the excellent work of advocacy group here in UK and around the world, on making sure that those issues are being communicated to the wider public, and they're being well discussed in the media, then we get a better understanding of how complicated building tech is and how resource extensive it is, and also the risk associated with it. So when the track and trace app was about to launch, and there was a lot of conversations in the public domain about the risks of harvesting all the small personal data, its security, and how that is going to be used, and while all this will pass, what sort of a guarantee do we have that all this data will be deleted and it's not going to be used in further purposes or other purposes to continue to strengthen the surveillance capabilities of one organization or the others. On the other hand, at enterprise level, I think this is where I tend to be a little bit more cautious. While the signals we get from our customers, and we've run a survey on 3 continents at the end of last year to ask them about the state of responsible AI, how much they invest in AI, how ready they are to move the higher or lower speed on adoption of AI, and how much of the issues of risk, ethics, and governance of AI are top considerations, the reality is that we are going through an economic crisis, and the signal that we got from the private sector, and this is not just in relation with AI, with all technology. Technology can be like a saving grace from a lot of organization. The fact that digital transformation, the one topic that was in fashion about 8 years ago, it's now in fact the main group of actions that could have a profound impact on survival of organization. Says how much companies will be looking at various technologies to be able to save the day. And in this process, some corner might be cut. And maybe this is where I'm a little bit more cautious in relation to responsible AI public awareness, is the fact that if required, perhaps some organization will choose to go on a route that will consider less of those issues, because we know considering or embedding ethics, and also considering and mitigating risk, and designing a new governance structure for AI, it's an extra layer of complexity added to the development of AI. And as a result is how many companies will want to push back or delay releasing some application and do it right. So I would say keep those two things in balance. Once we have far better prepared and active citizen, activists, and users, but also potential and future owners of AI powered technology that starts to understand the real danger and the complexity of developing it, which is like a big positive. On the other hand, a little bit of a word of cautious of, even if we would need desperately technology to save the day, we should take a little bit of a step back and marry the two main objective of saving the day with saving it responsibly.
I was going to ask you next about the future of responsible AI, but I think you nicely summarized the breadth of the questions that we should be asking in the future. So I'm just going to ask you a different question, which again, I want to come back to you at the end of the interview and ask you what are you working on right now? What keeps you awake at night? What makes you excited these days?
Right, what I'm working on at the moment. So twofold. One, I'm working actually threefold. I have lots of projects, to be honest. Sometimes one of the things that keeps me awake at night is, where do I find the things to do everything on top of my personal life, plus the things that I'm very passionate about around AI for children, for example, and empowering young women in the field of STEM and particularly AI. But let me try to summarize. So one of the projects I'm working at the moment is around employee well-being. So during the pandemic, thousands of our colleagues have been equipped with a wristband, and we collected some extra data that we match with internal data just to test the level of stress of our employees and understand their well-being during the pandemic. And I'm very lucky to be carrying the ethical analysis and being able to apply the newly designed, ethically align product design and build to this project, and being able to work with my team and understand what are all the ethical implications, how do we need to design a governance model, what sort of refresh our existing processes in PwC will require to be fit for development of projects like this. And that's very exciting, because I get to work with a very diverse set of stakeholders. We have not only data scientists and traditional HR professionals, but I get to work with human scientists, anthropologists, psychologists, human behavior experts. And that's very exciting, because that's when you see the power of diversity being brought forward, and see all those different perspectives that are being brought to an issue, and how much we start expanding our understanding, and being able to map possible negative consequences, but also being able to understand the positive the benefits that a tool like this will deliver to different stakeholders. Link with that, it's a second group of activities, which is embedding responsible AI principles across all our operation. And that's when I get to work again with a lot of different teams in PwC, from legal compliance to traditional ethics, but also our data and AI wider teams, and being able to look on one hand at our current processes and structures, and being able to assess if they are fit for purpose in the AI age, and also being able to develop new approaches that will complement the existing ones, so that we are more robust and more flexible when it comes to developing and using AI. And the third layer is about advising clients. So on top of my internal work, I work with our client teams, and I have clients in all sectors: financial services, technology, media, telecom, public sector, to be able to infuse our thinking and the deliverables we produce for our clients with the key ethical principles. And the responsible AI becomes de facto way of thinking about AI. I really love Virginia Dignum, who's a good friend of mine, and I admire her work very much. The way she describes responsible AI, and she said that ultimately, if AI is not done responsibly, we shouldn't do it at all. End of story.
So we come to the kind of traditional questions that I ask at the end, and I have to say all interviewees, most interviewees complain about them, because for the restrictions that I impose on these questions. But basically, a lot of the questions that we get on in this series is also what should I read? Can give us some reading recommendations and recommendations for films, perhaps a series. So the first question is this: if I ask you to recommend one book and one film, and I know you already showed us one book, what would your recommendations be?
I wanna show this again, because I think it's a fundamentally important book. It's Privacy is Power. I'm not sure.
Privacy is Power.
Yes.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Brilliant book. It comes as a compliment to now famous surveillance capitalist Shoshana Zuboff's Surveillance Capitalism, and besides this vision of privacy, the very new vision of privacy that Carissa brings, the style of writing is fantastic. So I love how Carissa writes. It's so engaging. You will read the book in 2 days, because it's so personal, and it's so nicely written. You know, she's a philosopher. She works at University of Cambridge. She's Oxford. She's not going to like me if I say Cambridge. Oh my goodness. But both universities are doing phenomenal important work in the field of responsible and ethical AI, by the way. But Carissa, going back to Carissa, she's a philosopher in heart, and philosophers are able to infuse their writing with a lot of narratives and quotes and storytelling. They're very good storytellers. So that's what I love this book so much, is that it takes something so sometimes technical and abstract topic of privacy, and it's put it in a context of a story that it's made very personal by Carissa. And it says ultimately we should all personally be concerned with our privacy, because the way we are developing and using those technology autonomous systems are are eroding our fundamental rights. So that's one of my favorite. It's the book of the 2020, no doubt for me. In terms of films, do they have to be films that were released in 2020, or just?
No, it can be any film that you like, and it doesn't even have to be on AI or responsibility, just a film that you kind of coming back to. Yeah. So it doesn't even have to be in the subject area of AI, but something that you like.
Perfect. Then I have two films. I'll start with first, which is not a film, is a series, is Star Trek: Next Generation. Is the film I grew up with as a teen back in Romania, and that's when I started being absolutely fascinated by technology and how humans are using technology, and what are the main philosophical questions we should be asking around having those technology. And I have to say, my favorite characters was by far Captain Picard, and hands on heart, I feel like I ended up working in technology, and technology ended up attracting me in every single job I've done, because realistically, in every single job I've done in the last 15, 17 years of my careers, technology had a role to play, even if I had a more business orientated job. But the second recommendation is my favorite film of all times. Is again a series of films. It's Star Wars. Again, I grew up with Star Wars as a child in communist Romania. For some reason, Star Wars was the outside Indian Bollywood films were the only two categories of films that managed to get through the communist yes, and propaganda machine. And I'm still impressed how, because obviously the message is quite political behind those films, but I suspect that someone in the Communist Party might have been a big Star Wars fan, and that's why they allow it for us to see it. So I was a small young girl when I first saw The Empire Strike Back, and I remember it was back in my village in Transylvania, and again, I was taken over by not only by technology, because there's not so much obvious technology in those films, but the human solidarity, the adventure, the friendship between those characters, and it still stayed with me through the days. And well, I have some favorites in the series, in the nine films in the series. I think what I'm still fascinated to the day is this message of solidarity and resilience that those films are able to broadcast, and the fact that even you are the baddies of the baddies, like Darth Vader, and yes, Darth Vader is actually my favorite character in the film, because of the journey he takes, and because of the fact that even if you are, as I said, the worst of the humans, there is a chance for you. And that to me is probably the most positive message of the series, is the fact that you can always turn back, even if you've done the worst things in the world, there is a hope for you. And probably that's something that I it's so close to my heart, and I take it everywhere I go, is the fact there is hope in the darkest time, when you feel there's nothing left and you can't fight, and your opponent is as strong as big as a Death Star. There's always hope, and that hope is based on compassion and friendship and strong human bonds. And if we have that, then we are very strong. We can beat the Death Stars, even if those Death Stars seems unbeatable.
That's a great message. So and there is a question that I added in the 2021 series, and I think we are trying to have quite a bit of fun with it. So you mentioned the characters that you liked in both films, but I just wanted to also ask you, who is your favorite fiction character, if you kind of had to pick one from things that you read and watched? Who would that be?
Oh, interesting. Well, I suppose that I should give you the first answer that come into my mind, right?
Yes.
Believe it or not, it's Scarlett O'Hara.
Yeah, well, great choice. Yeah.
She is again
Compassion and resilience.
is a very interesting. It's like I would say she was nothing. She wasn't compassionate to start with. She learned that the hard way. But I really, really admire her resilience. The fact that on one hand, her family meant everything. And although she was very spoiled and she had everything she could desire, when everything fell apart, she took the leadership. She was the strong one. She's the most she's one of the strongest female characters in the history of literature. And I really like that, right? No matter what happens around you, the world collapses, you just go on with it, right? You've been a missus with beautiful hair and perfect dresses, but when it requires, you go and pick up cotton and you sacrifice yourself for your family. And you are the strength that carries the family. And yes, you make mistakes. And yes, you continue to be spoiled and arrogant sometimes. But in the end, you are the light that keeps everyone going. And she's my favorite, top favorite. I don't think there's anyone else that comes closer to Scarlett O'Hara.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. This was Maria Axente for you with fantastic insights into responsible artificial intelligence, and also absolutely brilliant suggestions for things you should read and watch. And I just want to again thank you, Maria, for joining us today. And it was such a delight to have you with us. And good luck with everything that you're doing. And hopefully you will find a way to fit all those projects that I'm sure never end. But it's just it's a balancing act. But I'm sure you will be very efficient and handling all this load, and we'll expect more great things from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me here. It was a pleasure talking to you, and all the best to you and our listeners.
Thank you.